rotation is rotation. And so we're going to talk about how we can use this type of technology to help increase bat speed, club head speed, throwing speed, whatever speed you want as relation to rotation, right? Most people think of the 1080 about the sprint. We think about running. It's actually a super, super powerful and equally powerful tool to use for strength training and the data and all of that stuff. So I think it's being underutilized in that market. And so hopefully I'm going to give you ways you guys can either use your sprint or other stuff to help improve, right? So these are some truths. All rotary sports have nearly an identical kinematic sequence. All rotary sports have a nearly identical kinetic sequence, right? And when we talk about this stuff, obviously it's not exact, but it is generally, your body doesn't care if you're playing baseball, golf, tennis. It just knows that you're trying to create rotary speed. It doesn't care. Your muscles don't align up differently for golf than they do for baseball or whatever. We might change our tilts and our postures and stuff like that, which may change some length tension relationships and other things, but generally speaking, it creates rotation the way it creates rotation. And I think this next point really hammers home, I think something Eric said early, and this is a big part of my belief system, if I can get this to work. Numbers are great for spreadsheets, quantitative, but graphs tell the real story, qualitative, right? If I'm just going to look at numbers, peak power, peak this, peak whatever, I can still have someone come to the gym, train inefficiently, and have those numbers get better. Oh, look, you're more powerful. Oh, you're faster, you're this, you're that. But it doesn't mean you're doing it right. And it doesn't mean you're anywhere near optimal because you might be doing it a totally inefficient way. But I keep loading up my inefficiency and going harder and faster. You know what? My numbers are going to go up. So I think you have to start with your graphs and understand how your athletes move. And then from there, you want to move your numbers up. But the quality of the movement is really where the magic lies. Not only from a performance perspective, obviously, but from a health perspective. Because oftentimes, loading dysfunction over time is a disaster that we're all having. So how I got here? In 2016, when you work with golfers, anybody here work with any golfers or anybody? Yeah, we got one person here. So what you learn is when you work with golfers, I've been working with professional golfers since the 90s. But I also had my own facilities, similar-ish to this, in New Jersey, and I had regular people, not just professional athletes. And I had, when you work with golfers, you have a lot of 55-year-old dudes who sit behind a desk for 30 years, and they're like, oh, I was good. I played college baseball in 1982 or whatever, and now I play golf, right? And they're like, well, why can't I hit it far? I used to throw this. I used to do that, right? So I was like, wow, in golf, if you look at golf, if any of you know about professional golf, you have golfers that look like they really almost don't rotate their pelvis at all. They have a massive shoulder turn. They create this big, what we call X factor stretch, where they get their lower body firing. And then you have other people who have these giant long swings, right? So I call those resistors and releasers. Some people resist their pelvis in rotation in the backswing, and some people release it. Obviously, if you release it, you get a longer hand path. And if you have a longer hand path, you have more time and you can create more speed. It's an easy way to create some speed. If any of you play golf and you want to hit it further, let your hips turn more to the backside. It makes life a lot easier. But, so I wanted to understand why on tour, you look at a Rory McIlroy, a Jason Day, players like that, they kind of resisted, but then you had Phil Mickelson, and you have the John Daly's and the Bubba Watsons, and all these guys have these super long swings that are wrapped around their bodies, but they all were super effective at hitting it far. They all competed at a super high level. They all won lots of money, major championships, you name it. I knew there was clearly two different strategies going on, both being effective. And so I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. So you started looking at 3D data and all that stuff. So why was it? So I wanted to say, are just certain people more elastic, better at using stretch shorten, however you want to say it, than others? And I started putting them on force plates. And I just started looking at counter movement squat jump against squat jump and saying, okay, how do we do better? What does the graph look like on my force plate as I look at it? And so I wanted to know what I was seeing on my jump testing, could I measure that in rotation as well, right? Because in my jump testing, I was finding, by the way, that most people above 50 years old who are not great athletes and have not continued to train like a madman for a long time, they have no elasticity, by the way. They have no elasticity. Almost every single one who was over the age of 45 years old actually created more force faster in a squat jump than they could in a counter movement jump. And by the way, if you asked everyone after they did the 2 jumps, which one was better, every single one of them would say the counter movement one was better, and yet none of them were. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, right? So I wanted to know, could I do this in rotation? And was this like a universal thing? Is elasticity just global in your body? Like, are you actually elastic? Or do the specific tissues that are being stretched matter? Does the plane of motion matter? Or is it just like, oh, well, it's neurologic and that's a big piece of what I'm doing and that's what's driving the motion? And I wasn't sure what I was gonna find, so I actually reached out to Adam and Ola back in the day. And this is, sadly, this is during COVID. So we actually spent a lot of hours on phone calls. So if anybody of you guys don't know, at 1080, Ola's kind of their sports scientist who helps them develop all of this stuff and do it. And Adam, Ola, and I spent a lot of time saying, hey, it would be really cool if we could create some protocols where anybody who had a 1080 can come in and run their people through these evaluations. We can standardize how it's done. And then we can give actually the answers as well, saying, hey, if you see this, then do that. If you see this, do that. And we started going down this rabbit hole about 2020, I think it's pretty accurate. So we started collecting some data, right? And then as I kept going, I just was like, how can I use this thing to get people faster in rotation? That was kind of what my goal was. So what did we find as we started looking at stuff, right? We started doing all these different testing and so basically what we were doing is we were just thinking about like the squat jump as like a counter movement jump versus squat jump. We started doing like diagonal chops versus counter movement diagonal chops, right? Because on the 1080, you can control the velocity the cable's moving at. You can do all of this cool stuff. And we're like, all right, well, this is gonna be interesting to see because now I have this dynamic change of direction thing going on, which is really where a lot of the energy, whether it's hitting a baseball, is stored in this kind of amortization phase of what we're trying to do. It's the same thing we're gonna talk about in the force plate, right? If you looked at change of direction stuff, right? The amortization, the guy who could put the brakes on the fastest, can push off, change direction the fastest, those are the people who are the most agile, right? So the amortization phase, if everybody knows, it's the brief transition window where the athlete stops absorbing force without losing their energy, right? And then express it again. You're taking that eccentric force and then you're transitioning into your concentric force. Call it stretch shorten, call it what you like. I call it the instant between load and explode, right? And athletes who are the most efficient in the amortization phase, pretty much I think in a lot of sporting applications, I think we could all probably argue are our better athletes, right? This is where the magic happens in this amortization phase. What makes it efficient, right? It's a short, stiff, well-timed amortization phase, right? So people talk about muscle stiffness, all of that stuff. We've heard a lot about that, and the foot striking and running and pitching and all of that stuff, right? But it's short and it's well-timed, right? We preserve elastic recoil in the tendon and the fascia. We enhance rate of force development. We improve speed, power, agility, right? A long amortization phase, the person who doesn't do it, right? And you can see it in different sports, like in baseball and hitting. You may even see someone like on force plate data, when they hit, there's a little bit of continued knee flex on that lead side before that pops up, just like they were talking about in the pitching, right? And when I did my lacrosse studying, that was one of the same things we saw a lot with them, that a foot plant, anybody who continued into knee flexion, that time that was lost the elastic component to it. So in the long amortization phase, elastic energy leaks away as heat, movement becomes slower and more muscular, higher metabolic cost for the same output, right? You're working hard to do it. You're using more muscular approach than an elastic approach. The amortization phase is the brief transition period when the body shifts from storing rotational energy in the backswing, right? Even though baseball doesn't have a backswing like golf, it does have a counter trigger to it as well, right? When the body shifts from storing rotational energy in the backswing, the eccentric loading of the hips, the pelvis, all the trunk, all of that cool stuff, scapular system, to release that energy into the forward swinging concentric acceleration of the kinetic chain. Performance depends on how quickly and efficiently the athlete can reverse the rotational direction while maintaining tensions and sequencing through the ground, hip, torso, arm, bat, club, whatever object you're using, right? There's obviously nuance to all this. We have a lot of talk about ISA today, and somebody who might be narrow, maybe having their hands higher and having more scapular loading and other stuff, but fundamentally we're going to kind of go through this through the gross patterning for now. Everything in sports, everything everyone has talked about today has its own nuance to it. And the magic obviously is in the nuance, but we start with the principles of what we're trying to understand. So this is just me. So if you see here, that's what the quantum looks like. For those of you who have never seen a quantum tower, you can see it's this giant thing. Or if you've seen a synchro, there's two of them between the Smith machines. They're what on the ends of the Smith machine, right? So I just have one standing alone. You see that on my floor, I have a grid drawn. That grid is really, 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 really important. Because if you're going to use data when you're jumping or sprinting or whatever the case may be, being able to reproduce how you assessed or test someone and having reproducibility that's accurate is critical to understanding the outcomes that you're seeing. So for me in golf, about 45 degrees, I do a counter movement there where I kind of bring it up and fire it down. I do 2 different reps, and they look basically, these guys can, Adam will tell you, when you look at them with your eyes, they look basically the same. Doesn't look like I'm doing anything different. And I think that's one of the things that makes technology so incredible is that you get to see what you can't see, right? And you get to measure what you can't do with your eyes. So that was a demonstration of the exercise. And this is what I saw on my 1080 graph of those 2 different reps. So when you create your exercise, you go in there and you can type up your description or whatever it is. But what I do is I want to show the data eccentric before concentric. Because it will normally just go concentric, eccentric. But if you want to understand the loading mechanism, you need to reverse your graphs and have it show you the eccentric component first. So these are made by itself. So the dotted line here, this is the eccentric phase, and that's the concentric phase. And right now, we're just looking at speed in meters per second and time along the bottom, okay? So unfortunately, you didn't get to see my 2 terrible reps there, but understand they look the same. And remember, I was talking about that V in the jumping. Well, here I got V's also, right? I got this V here, and I got this V here. And you see how wide this one is, and you see how much sharper that one is, right? Visually, you would not be able to see any difference. So a couple things, you go look at this and you go, okay, well, what do I learn? First, I want to see which one has the better shape. And I go, okay, well, this one has the better shape. Well, that one, right, also, I got there faster, right? My eccentric velocity was quicker, right? My peak concentric was sooner. Eric's squeeze it all together, make it taller. Where this one, I was slower. It took me all the way to 0.7 seconds to finish my back, right? And then I peaked way out here and obviously much lower. So that becomes a pretty powerful tool right there of how someone is going to create rotation, right? So now I might say, well, I want to understand, well, that looks great from a speed perspective, but did I actually create more power? Did I create whatever that it is that I'm looking for? So now all I can do is I can just jump over to my power graph, right? And I can go, okay, let me take a look at these 2. And now I got my watts along the side here. And you clearly see how much sooner, how much higher. I mean, the difference was 801 watts to basically 1,298 watts in those 2, right? Obviously, within the same person, if they're truly giving you a max effort every time, those lines are going to be tight together, and it's going to take a little bit more nuance to read through them. I purposely did it so it was obvious to be able to see the differences, right? But you will be able to have the graphs and understand it. And like I said in the beginning, the graph is telling me the story. Because I could go in and say, oh, this one peaked sooner, or later, or my V is better, or whatever the case may be. But then once I have my data set, like Kevin talked about, is 1,300 watts good enough? And that depends on your population. That depends on a lot of different variables that I'm looking at, right? But is 1,300 good enough? Because I might be efficient, but just not very powerful. Well, what does it tell me? If I was really fast in my speed graph and my power is still low, what do I know now? I need more force, right? If speed is good, power is low, force is low, right? So just those 2 graphs alone give me part of my direction and answer of where I need to go with how I'm going to start my training protocols with those people. But you see, this is really no different than looking at a force plate graph. it's basically giving me a rotational version of looking at that. The shape of the bottom, the shape of the transition, how fast it happened, how much force I created, how much power I created, how quickly I did it. I'm getting all the same type of information that I'm trying to get through, right? So now, there's problems in these different scenarios, right? If I go back to the original graph, where my eccentric velocity was low, let's say this, or slow in this example, right? Generally speaking, if I'm really slow in the eccentric loading phase, I'm not going to be super powerful, right? Like one of the things I do, and I don't know if anybody else does this when they're doing their force plate jumps, if someone jumps on a force plate for me and I don't like the outcome, the first thing I ask them to do usually is, can you drop in quicker for me and try it again? I want you to unweight faster. People who can handle it will typically improve performance immediately. The people who you ask them to do that and their performance goes down, well, what do you learn? They can't create the muscle stiffness on time. They can't they can't absorb the eccentric force and the eccentric loads, right? And so you might be looking at those persons and saying, I need to do like drop jumps and maybe some flywheel stuff and trying to change amortization phase and work on the braking piece of it, right? So possible cause, they're not strong enough eccentrically or not fast enough eccentrically, like, because your brain will downregulate you, right? Like if I start saying go fast, and my brain knows that I can't handle that speed, it's just not going to let me go there. I'm not going to like fall down on the ground and like get ripped into the machine. Like my brain's just not allowing it to happen. I was like trying to have a conversation with Adam about what I call gapping the cord. And I don't, because my machine's old and he started getting into something about magnetic cables versus, I don't know, whatever. They must have changed the technology since I had mine. And he's like, I don't know if that would work on the new one. And so I didn't get in that. But like I would actually say, how big of a load can I give them that they can change direction fast, where I put it at 6 meters per second on the eccentric phase, can they actually get the thing to gap up, like they can actually create slack in the cord and then change direction? Because I guess I played around with that with a lot of different athletes, on mine at least, again, I don't know about the new one, like you would just see is like, well, why can I gap it up at 3 kgs and at 6 kgs I can't? Because I'm just going back as fast as I can. It's because my brain is down regulating because it knows the task at hand. Before you start moving, your brain knows what your intention is, and it's pre-programmed based on your physiology. It knows your ability to perform before you perform. So you go, oh, I'm going to do this in-out action, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, at 3 kgs, my brain's like, yeah, no problem, and I can just gap it up and rip it. And at 6, it goes, when that thing hits and the cable stiffens, it's going to bury you. And all of a sudden, no matter how hard I tried to go fast, I couldn't gap the cable, even though I was still moving at the exact same velocity with the cable, right? So it was down-regulating my system. So then that could be a braking or eccentric braking issue, the timing component of it, right? So what can I do? I can do some simple, what's cool about the 1080 is you can program all this stuff, right? I can control the loads, I control the velocities, the concentric, the eccentric. I have the ability to manipulate all of these variables the way I want, right? So if I go like this, hey, I got slow eccentric velocity or braking, whatever it is, I might want to do some high velocity, low load eccentric braking where I'm getting out here and I'm letting it catch, and I'm just catching. I just want to feel like I'm dead stopping. So think about like a drop jump for rotation, right? And I'm catching. I may also just want to build some strength and force. I might take a yielding isometric on there, right? So I can start manipulating what end of this curve that I want to start doing. It's really easy to do. I have a note here. All these exercises we can done with a handle, because that's how we're talking about it. But I can do these with a 3D strap, and I can have it around my pelvis to focus more there. I can have it around my trunk to focus there more. I mean, if you have a bunch of athletes who get a hand or a wrist injury, which is something I've been dealing with one of my professional golfers, and we can't grab handles and we can't do any of this stuff, but I want them to come back and they got a bat. Well, I can start doing a whole bunch of this stuff with 3D straps around their body. And still, while it's not the same as connecting the arms, it's still pretty good. And you can get a lot of pop out of it. And like he literally couldn't play for 3 weeks, and literally the first 2 days back hitting ball, we were right at 185 mile an hour ball speed, like instantly. It's like, okay, that works. That works pretty good, okay? So that's for you to decide what you're doing again, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole yet, or we can go down later. If you had 3D on your people, you might be able to say, oh, based on their kinematic sequence graph, what I see in their pelvis, I'm going to go after pelvis with the strap, or what's happening in the relationship to trunk to arms, or pelvis to trunk, or whatever it is. I can isolate out those buckets, just kind of how Kevin just did there by looking at that. I can use the 3D data, and then I can take the 3D data and isolate, I'm not getting an efficient transfer between these two segments or whatever the case may be, right? So my problem could be in the concentric phase, right? Or I have low power output, right? So problem, I might just not be strong enough concentrically. Just simple as that. I'm not strong enough to get there, right? I may not be fast enough concentrically. Well, similarly, like I talked about earlier, where you can do a high velocity, I can do an overcoming isometric, right? Just from a pure force perspective, right? I can also do, if you don't know, depending on your facility, like some people don't have med ball walls. They have an awesome med ball wall here, right? But a lot of people don't have place to throw med balls or whatever. They're outside and the ball's going, whatever. If you have one of these cables, you do know that you can put it on no fly weight and almost like you're doing a med ball throw, literally rip the thing as hard as you can, and the cable will just lay on the ground and come back as slow as possible, right? So I can do awesome. And look, I understand that you can do some of this stuff with med balls in different ways. But you know what that doesn't give you? Data. Doesn't let you track, understand what they're doing over time, seeing, are they getting more powerful? Are they getting faster? What happens to the shape of the graph? Does the quality of the movements improve? All of that stuff, right? So what's cool about using this is I'm getting all of that information. I'm getting the training effect, obviously, I'm looking for, but I also can monitor, track over time, and look at both the outputs, let's call that the spreadsheet data, and then the graphs, the qualitative movement quality perspective of what we're trying to look at, right? So I can do this, like I said, I could be overcoming, and I could be literally like I'm firing that thing as hard as I can under low load and looking at what type of velocities I could potentially hit doing it. And then you might go, well, there's not one thing that's bad. It's kind of like just all needs to be better, and I want to kind of do the complete motion, right? So I could have a speed bias program where I'm doing fast eccentric, fast concentric, low load, high velocity both ways. I can have a strength bias where I'm doing combining yielding and overcoming isometrics, right? And then I can also do like high load, low velocity both ways, right? Because I can have yielding and then wham, or vice versa, right? Depending on what the shapes of the graphs are telling me. So here, right, so you have high velocity eccentric with overcoming isometrics. Again, you can do this with different ground forces, so then you can get creative. Like, so one of the things I like, if I got a guy and I have force plate data, and I maybe need a little bit more lateral push in them and how they're using, I might take an overcoming rotation with a super high velocity eccentric. So I'm gonna get him here and I want him, at the end, I want him to give me shuffle step. And now all of a sudden this thing is ripping back super fast. They have got to get that foot in the ground, create stiffness on that backside, and then push again to actually try to re-accelerate this thing against massive load. And we can put them in that. And then you start seeing the shapes of that. So that's just like, you can start biasing different stuff you see on force plates, you see on your 3D graphs. You can start saying, okay, well, where is there need in what we're doing? And I can start manipulating the movement like Kevin did by, giving him the variable resistance, right? I can say, oh, it's a lateral component because I have force plate data or 3D data or whatever, and start biasing all of this stuff, right? So we just went through a bunch of these different scenarios, right? If I don't want to have any type of bias, what do we talk about in the spring? I can literally just do a load velocity profile. When I do it, I do like 5 kgs, 10 kgs, 15 kgs, counter movement rotation stuff. I do my load velocity profile, I get my VDEC, and I can say, oh, I'm looking for power and I'm running at 50%, or I want to lean a little bit on the velocity side, I'm going to be at 30%, I want to be fast, I want 10%, whatever. You can use your VDEC, which is awesome, right? If anybody hasn't used the VDEC, it basically, you create your load velocity profile. It gives you your curve, it actually gives you an R value as well. And then from there, it tells you what loads you should be using at what percentages, and then also, importantly, is at what velocities you should be able to hit under those loads, right? What velocity should you hit on those? And which is really helpful for just coaching, right? Because you might give someone, say, oh, well, I know I have to use whatever, 15 kgs. And so you do your VDEC, you're like, okay, 15 kgs, and they do their thing. And you're like, okay, well, they did it. Well, but how fast did you do it? There is a number correlated with the load that you have to try to hit, right? So if your person gets it done and you're like, no, I still need that faster, right? It helps you be a better coach. And if you work with competitive people, I was saying this to Eric earlier, one of the things I love about data and I love about numbers is you work with good competitive people, you don't have to say a lot. Hey, dude, here's your goal, this fast. I need you to be at 5 meters per second, whatever the number is. And they're below, you don't have to say a word. They know. They're smart, and they're going to give you more on the next rep. And they're going to try to get there, right? Like, you just know if you have the right people, the motivational part of coaching just becomes the numbers. They want to break the records, the leaderboard and Eric talked about earlier. Like, they want to be up on the board. They want those things. So you just create the right training environment, and you let the thing do its magic. And you step back and go, hey, here we go. And just like Kevin did with his adding velocity, he didn't overcoach him. He just knew how to use the technology properly to make the change he wants, right? You can use constraint models. You can use whatever different environmental, constraint, whatever type of constraints you want to use. You can create constraints that allow you to make the changes that you're doing, right? So the VDEC is a great place to start, right? Start by creating your load velocity profile. So where are my loads that I should be at? And then I want to look at the quality of the motion from there. And then I can kind of pick and choose. Am I going eccentric strength bias? Am I going eccentric velocity bias? I'm doing concentric load bias. Am I doing concentric velocity bias? Where am I on these curves of the things that I need to do?